It never fails. This time of year, I start getting the emails and the DMs from teachers just absolutely panicked about your pacing because you're behind schedule. You don't know what to do. You feel guilty. You're like, why does this keep happening? Or I expected so much greater. And now we are literally on unit 4. What am I doing? And this is something we've talked about before on this podcast, actually back in episode 116. So that was like 2 years ago. So I just thought it was worth revisiting, especially because I don't know if I've shared this on the podcast yet, but I always try to choose kind of like a word for the year that I'm really putting all things in my life through, kind of as a filter or lens through which I see things. And sometimes it's more of a phrase. And this year, my phrase, because it's not a word, is to slow down. I feel like I just don't want the people around me, my children in particular, to look back and remember that I behaved like a chicken with my head cut off, running around, because that tends to be my default state of being because I value productivity and efficiency and stuff so much. But, everything has a cost. And so sometimes that cost is my relationships with others. And so in this whole slow down, I'm starting to see slow down everywhere. And I'm even seeing that theme come up in this conversation about being panicked about pacing and like, okay, well, I don't want to rush. Like, yeah, I'm behind, but I also don't want to rush my students because that's not always the solution too. We don't want them walking into our classrooms feeling completely stressed out because of our frenetic energy because we feel so behind, so we got to catch them up. And I say this to you not out of blame, but because that is so me. That is so how I am and what my default state is. And that's why I'm spending an entire year actively trying to push against that. And so I want to do that with you today. I kind of want to slow down. I want to talk about this topic again, even though it might feel redundant. Talk about it maybe in a little bit different way. Consider some things again, and then really figure out where do you go from here if you're feeling behind in schedule. You feel like you need to cover more these last few months of school and you don't know how you're going to do it. And or you're like, this is a chronic problem for me. And how do I manage it? Or maybe this is a new problem for you that's come about these last few years as students have come to you at such a deficit that now you're finding you're having to spend so much time reteaching or retraining on skills that you can't get through the content you used to get through. So what do you do when you're panicked about your pacing? Let's dive in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. First and foremost, in the nature of slowing down, I just want you to take a deep breath for a second. I want you to inhale for 3 seconds, hold for 3, and exhale for 3. Okay, let's settle the nervous system a little bit if you truly are feeling panicked. If you need even more settling, I would step outside and get some sunshine on your face and some grass on your toes ASAP, even if it is February and you've got frosty grass. Also, shout out to all y'all in the north. I don't know how you do it. Every January here in the low country, we get about 2-ish weeks of temps in the 30s, that kind of thing. Highs maybe in like the 40s, but the sun's out, And it's hard. We can't handle it down here. We need our highs in the 50s and our lows in the 40s at least to function. We get 9 months out of the year of good weather, so I don't know how y'all do it. Like my sister lives in Portland, Maine, and so she gets snow for, 6 months sometimes. It's insane. So I say all that to say, take a deep breath and give yourself grace. Remember that you are a human being. You are not an AI robot humanoid teaching these children, these students, okay? They're young adults. I don't know why I called them children. So remember that you are a human being. This is your job. It is not your life. You have a life outside of this job. And depending on the season of life that you're in, you have a lot of different needs that might be impacting your ability to do your job at maximum efficiency and proficiency. Because you, again, are a human, not an AI robot. So let's give ourselves some grace here if you're feeling some type of way in terms of guilt about this, like that we're so far behind and it's all my fault. Next, let's look at some facts here. Let's look at some numbers. What is it that is making you feel quote unquote behind or stressed about your pacing? Are you following some sort of pacing guide that's been given to you from another teacher? Are you following a pacing guide from a textbook company or that your district has given you in terms of their guidelines for how quickly you should be getting through the content to prepare for the end of course exam? Anything you're getting from another human being that's not yourself, I would just take with a grain of salt. Okay. Even my own pacing. Okay. All of my It's Not Rocket Science units come with unit plans. They come with 50 minutes. That's for a teacher on a 50-minute every day, all year schedule. They come with 90-minute block for teachers that either have 90 minutes every day for half a year or 90 minutes every other day all year. And they come in on grade level CP and honors. Now, the reason I provide them in all those different ways is because I have experience teaching in all of those different settings and levels. So I feel competent in being able to set a pace there based on my experiences. However, even my own pacing guides that I have written from my own experience, I have had groups of students that we have not kept my own pace. Okay. Especially I'm even thinking about biology, which is the one I've taught the most, especially because one of the schools I was at was a semester block, which I kind of loved because then you get to kind of start over in the year mid-year. And you get like 2 years of teaching experience in one because you totally get to redo everything a second time come January with a new group. So I've had so many sections of biology and still there have been groups that have not fallen in line with my pacing, okay? So give yourself some grace, give your students some grace. I mean, I had a year that I had where 60% of my students had an IEP or 504 in my classroom. And so that was more than half. We were not going to be keeping the pace of my other sections. And was it a little frustrating? Yeah, because at that year, I had 3 sections of general biology. So it was really tricky to have one that couldn't keep up with even the pace of the other 2. So if that's why you're feeling behind, I get it. Honestly, it is annoying. And it's annoying to have different due dates. It's annoying to assign a test in 2 classes who are ready and 1 class that isn't, knowing that they can share the information. Like, this is tricky. But I just want you to give some grace for yourself and your students. And whatever pacing guide you're referring to, even if it's one you created yourself last year, let's just give it a lot of grace. The reason that disappointment exists is because the gap that exists between our expectations and what reality is. And one way that we can minimize disappointment, and I hate to say this because I mean, it's like, if you could see my hands right now while I'm talking, I'm like lowering them, is to lower our expectations. I'm not saying lower the bar. I'm not saying, do less, be blessed. But I am saying give yourself grace that like we can't, every year you're not going to be able to hit this certain pacing. It will be idealistic. And that's where I always recommend, if you can, building in buffer time, buffer days, especially if you're in an EOC course or an AP exam course, just knowing that things are going to arise. You will get quote unquote behind. And this helps you not feel so stressed about it. Especially if you live somewhere where you can just anticipate weather days. I don't care if they build in the snow days or for us, it's hurricane days. It still just throws my panties in a wad when they are just back-to-back days for severe weather. Here, we get thrown for a loop too, because sometimes they'll just say it's too cold for the kids to come to school. And that's crazy because they just mean if it's in the 20s. And I know some of y'all are listening and you're in Canada. You're in Minnesota and Michigan. And you're like, we're going out to recess when it's 5 degrees. I know this is Southerners' problems, but I just say all that to say, like, I would get so frustrated. And then I just had to remember, like, okay, it's because I'm writing 180 days of lesson plans when in actuality I should plan on 150. And then that gives me a 30-day buffer of overflow or, makeup time for when things go wrong. Okay. So give yourself grace. Every group of students is different, whether you're at the same school year after year or not. Your school culture can change based on your admin and what they value and how many interruptions to class time they allow. You need grace if your schedule has changed in terms of how much time you have. And again, give yourself grace for whatever you're going on personally. Like I said, you're not a robot. You're not going to always be as high energy and productive and able to keep a high energy pace class in some seasons as you are in others, because you're just not going to be as sharp in some seasons as you are in others. Thinking about all y'all with a new baby at home, or taking care of one of your aging parents, that's a huge responsibility outside of class. Or maybe you're fostering some extra children in your home. Like, you got things going on that are going to make you tired. Maybe you've got some of your own personal health things, okay? So let's give ourselves some grace there. Again, if you need to pause and take another deep breath, go off. Please do it. Another thing I want you to look at when I say look at the facts is the actual time. I want you to sit and calculate how much instructional time you are getting, and then accept that you're not going to get all that time. Okay, so for example, at one school I taught at, again, traditional schedule, 50 minutes every day, all year. I was supposed to have 50-minute class periods, 180 days a year. That's 9,000 minutes. Okay, that's the maximum amount of instructional time at any school I've ever taught in that I could have had. At two other schools, when I taught block, again, one was a semester block, one was AB. In both situations, they were 90-minute classes for 90 days. That's 8,100 minutes. Okay, so I've already right there lost 10% of my teaching time from the ideal. And then, like y'all know, that's assuming that I get all 180 of those days with those no interruptions, or 90 days with no interruptions. We all know that's not going to happen. So then take some cut time there. Y'all DM me all the time. Some of y'all have the craziest schedules. You're like, Mondays, 90 minutes. Tuesdays, Thursdays, I see them for 45. Every other Friday, when it's a full moon, I see them for 2 hours. I'm like, what is going on? But I would say take some time with whatever your crazy schedule is that you've been assigned, and do some math and figure out your instructional minutes. I've never heard of anyone getting more than 9,000 minutes in a school year. And again, that would be if we're running at 100% productivity and efficiency and there's zero interruptions. So most likely you're getting a smaller number than that. So take that and accept that, and lower your expectation in terms of what you're expecting to accomplish in your time. You cannot look at someone who is getting 8,100 instructional minutes and be disappointed that you can't cover as much when you only get 5,900 instructional minutes. So again, this is all about giving ourselves some grace here. Now, some of you, this is a chronic problem for you. You're like, it doesn't matter where I am and what the schedule is, I always struggle with time and getting everything through. We're going to talk about what to do practically for you. Okay, I promise. Now, on the other hand, some of you are listening and you're like, I used to never have a problem with pacing. And now I can't get through everything because of these students, because of the culture of the classroom now, because students are so far behind. Like, do I rush them? Do I push them and tell them they either need to drown or catch up? Do I take the time to slow down and reteach? Do I just move on? Like, there's a lot to consider. And those are a lot of external factors that are out of your control. So a few things I want you to consider doing. 2 past episodes I've done. Episode 202 is what to do when your students fail a test. It has some very practical things, but also some just good questions to consider to help you reflect on, like, is this a me problem or a them problem? And then episode 203 is all about who makes up the deficit when your students come in behind. If you're feeling like, wow, they are so far behind, how am I supposed to cover all of these state standards for the biology EOC when they literally have zero background knowledge? You need to give episode 203 a listen. Now, we've taken deep breaths. We've given ourselves grace. We've done some math and looked at the facts and kind of identified, are my expectations realistic for what I can accomplish? Do I need to consider if this is a chronic problem of mine, if this is a class culture problem? Is it me and them? Like, what's going on? Trying to identify some of those things. And now the most important thing in this episode is what I'm about to ask you. And it's, does it matter? Does it really matter that you're behind? And this is where you have to decide, teacher friend, what matters most to you. And this might be different for every single class you teach. For example, when I taught biology, it mattered that I covered all the standards because it mattered so much for my students' ability to pass my class and for all these different things that my school held so highly for me to have good EOC scores. And so you need to give episode 147 a listen. How do you cover all the standards? Like, how do I get through it all when I have to get through it all? But other classes, did it actually matter that we got through it all? Like in physical science, I really wanted to get through it all, but did it actually matter? And if what matters most to you is preparing your students for the course they're going to take after you, I recommend going and asking that teacher, or asking yourself if you teach 4 preps and you're going to be their next teacher, what's the most important thing that they get through? What are the skills they need to have to be successful in that next class? If I'm teaching physical science, most of my physical science students aren't going to go on to take physics, but they will go on to take chemistry because it's a required class in a lot of districts around me. And so maybe it's saying, I need to start in physical science with the chemistry units and do physics at the end because the chemistry ones are going to be the most important. And then I can trim on physics if I need to. That's going to be a different decision for each of you. Even AP Bio, any AP Science doesn't have to be biology, but maybe what matters most is their test scores, but also maybe it's not. Maybe you genuinely are like, I want to prepare them for college, and that doesn't necessarily always align with preparing them for the AP exam and passing that exam. So maybe you're like, I'm just going to prioritize this and trust that if I prioritize the right type of critical thinking and skills, then they're going to at least be able to pass the exam. Okay, maybe in chemistry, my personal opinion for chemistry is I would rather cover less and do it better than cover all 10 of my units. I tell that to every person that emails me. Again, half the emails I get this time of year, I am not on unit 6, I'm on unit 4 or whatever. I would say, okay, to me, my goal for you would be to get through just the first 5 units, maybe 6 is even better. Then you can pick from 7 through 10 what you kind of want to hit next if you have time for another. Whereas on the other hand, I feel differently about anatomy. What matters most to me in anatomy is instilling an interest in the human body that would motivate them to want to pursue a health science career. And so in anatomy and physiology, I actually care about them getting to learn about every body system. So I would rather cut a lot of the memorization and things like that and a lot of the nitty-gritty details so that we can get through more of the body systems, do more interesting research projects, and have time for those really great discussion questions that come up in anatomy. And I had the freedom to do that as an elective course. Again, these are all just examples and my personal experience. You may feel differently. Maybe honors bio, your number one goal is to prepare them for AP Bio. On grade level, your number one goal is just to help them get their credit they need because this is a credit they need to graduate. I don't know what that is for you, but you do need to ask that question. I want you to take a minute and write down every prep that you have and write next to it what matters most, because that's going to inform where we go next, which is the changes you might need to make. And maybe you don't need to make any changes because you've actually realized through this episode that actually what matters most is the relationships I'm forming with these students because of the culture of this classroom. I just want to actually teach them life skills. I want them to have a positive student-teacher relationship. So I'm going to do that and focus on discussion and inquiry and all of these things that take a lot of time that aren't very efficient over covering content. That's a choice that you can potentially have the prerogative to make. I hope you have the autonomy to make that choice. I know sometimes admin are making these choices for you. So now we get to the practical part. What are the changes we need to make? If you're like, based on what matters most, I've got to make some changes. First, I would say you need to do a time audit of your class period. I would do one for a full week, especially if you have different timestamps on your class periods throughout the week. Like you have one of those crazy schedules of like Monday, Wednesday, Friday is one thing, Tuesday, Thursday is another. I want you just for the next week, y'all, to record in your class. Maybe it's looking like sending a voice memo to yourself and then you have the transcript. You can use Otter AI will record voice recordings and automatically make transcripts of them and say, okay, at the end of class, you're going to take 30 seconds to do that little voice memo and say, okay, here's what we did. We spent like 5 minutes on this and 10 minutes on this. And then this lab took however long. But do that for 1 week and then look at it and really analyze, like, did I use time well in this? Maybe you'll see that you're spending 30 minutes on a reinforcing practice and we don't have time for that. So maybe your response then to that time audit is saying, why are we doing practice problems of 10 or more? If they can do 5 practice problems, they can do 20. So maybe it looks like we're just going to start with doing odds from now on when we do reinforcing practice. And then if we have time to do more, if you want to come to tutoring, or if you want extra practice after school, you can do the evens. That's something that we can learn and practically do after we do a time audit. Maybe you look at it and you say, man, I think we're just slow moving. It just took forever to go from the notes to the lab, or, we did this bell ringer and then it took forever to actually get into the lecture notes after I checked everyone's homework. Okay, so maybe you need to tighten up your transitions and make your pacing a little bit more precise. If that's the case, you need to listen to episode 92. I talk all about how to do that. If you're someone who struggles with time management and quick transitions, how you can kind of train up your students. Now, maybe you do this audit and you realize there are some simple, just overall changes you can do. So for example, if notes are taking a long time because they're so slow at writing, okay, then you need to move to fill in the blank notes or completely filled in notes, or maybe letting them type notes, which I don't love because I'm really, really moving away from technology nowadays. I'm a big fan of pen and paper, and I think it's so much less distracting for them. But maybe that's what it looks like. And if you use It's Not Rocket Science units, that's zero extra work for you because all the packets come with those multiple options. Maybe it looks like you used to do a lot of in-class projects, and now we're just going to cut projects for this quarter. Maybe this is a quarter where we're not going to have a project. I hate to cut a project. I love research opportunities for students. I think it's really interesting. But I would always cut a project before I'm cutting a lab. So look at those kinds of things. Another thing too, if you use my units, look at my differentiation guides. I added them last summer and last spring. Physical science is in the works. So the 5 units that are published have been added to the differentiation guide. But for every single It's Not Rocket Science unit, I've gone through and given ideas for how you can make the content more challenging for advanced students, but then also things you can cut out if you're short on time in your on grade levels classes. So that can help you too. Okay, but that is one thing I want you to do. I want you to just look at this and do that time audit and kind of see what is being the greatest time suck. Is it going over stuff? Because maybe that looks like posting an answer key online and having them self-grade, and then you can hit the highlights when you're in class. I know a lot of teachers that do that. They're just I'm not grading all this stuff and you're cheating anyway, so I'm just going to post the answer key into our private, little channel we have, our portal or whatever. You are supposed to do this for your own good to learn it, and then you can self-grade it. And then if you have questions, we'll go over it for 5 minutes as opposed to 20 as a whole class. But you're not going to know this information unless you take the time to collect the data and see where the time in your class period is going. So I want you to try to do that. There are all sorts of free apps and things on the internet too, where you can kind of track this on your computer. But I think it can be as simple as having a Post-it note out as you're transitioning, mark the time that things are happening, and then, you've got that, or you can send yourself a voice memo at the end of class or whatever. Okay. Now, the last thing I'll say is this. I want to read to you something I heard from someone who submitted a response to the Secondary Science Simplified podcast survey. First of all, thank you. Thank you so much if you did that. I always send that survey out to my email list, and this year that was over 20,000 people, and 381 people responded. And I just want you to know I have read every single person's submission. Yes, I ran it through ChatGPT to see if it could come up with some themes, but honestly, it's not the same to me. I know it can summarize, but I just want to put my eyeballs on your words, and I draw names for the gift cards that I send out to 5 people, but also I'm slowly working through emailing some of you personally and directly who ask questions, and we have podcast episodes that already answer those questions, but I'm using your submissions to come up with all of the 50 episodes that will go out this year for this podcast. So thank you if you submitted. And here is a submission I got that is directly going to now be answered in this episode. So if this was you, this is for you. This teacher said, I need help keeping up with pacing. My students don't have a state science exam in the grade I teach, so I don't have to get to a certain point in the material to cover with them. So I've always gone at the pace that each specific class needs. I love this. But then this person says, but I would like to make it further because there are students that want to move faster, and I want to be able to expose them to a wider variety of topics within chemistry and physics, especially if they do not need to take it at the general level in college. Okay, so I think this is a really interesting question. Again, it's going to come back to you deciding what matters most to you. Also, we're going to talk about this next week because it kind of needs its own episode, how to manage students working at different paces, which is something that this teacher referenced. That some students want to move faster, others don't. So kind of how do you balance that? So we're going to address that fully next week. But what I'll say to this is first decide what matters most to you, then do your time on it. Then I would do a full audit of the instructional resources that you are currently using and decide if they are worth their time. Okay, so here's what this can look like. This can look like listing out in a unit. Here's every single thing that we use from an instructional resource standpoint. If you use this in rocket science, this is already listed like on the unit plan, and everything but practice is listed on the NGSS alignment guide. But list all those things out. Next to it, put about how much time it takes. Is this a 15-minute practice and 10 minutes to go over it? Is this a lab that spans 3 days? Is this a project that spans a full week? Okay, put how much time it takes. Then I want you to put what standards are covered or addressed or engaged with this. So that would be for like, if you're using NGSS, put the DCIs that's being covered. If you're not, you can list your state standard. You can just list general topics that are being addressed here. Then if you're using NGSS, I would list out the SCPs and the CCCs that are engaged. Again, if you use It's Not Rocket Science, I've already done this in the NGSS alignment guide for you. You can just add like the timestamps to this. If you're not, I would list out just general skills that this utilizes. And then look at your unit as a whole, now that you've done this, and really say, are each of these instructional resources worth the time that I'm giving them? Sometimes we do things just for the sake of fun, and I think that's great. But if what matters most to you is getting to cover a wider variety of topics, then maybe you're going to have to trim some of those things so that you can create more space for that. Okay, or maybe you're looking and you're like, golly, this is awesome. And it has like you're looking at adding a dissection into your biology class. And you're like, I love doing fetal pigs in biology because not all kids get to take anatomy. But it takes like a solid week to do it well. Yes, it's very cool. But is this something where could you use that week of time better to get them engaged in the science and prepare them and then motivate them to go on and take anatomy as an elective science? And then they'll get to do so many dissections. Okay, these are the things I want you to consider. And I don't think you can do that unless you really look at the data. Like I said earlier, unless you write it all out and really take the time to look at it. So I think that's something worthwhile to do, especially if pacing is a chronic problem for you. If it's something you consistently have a problem with over and over again, and you have a hard time making the decision of what to keep and what not. The other thing too is like, if you're like, I really want to get to this topic and we never get to it, maybe consider changing up your sequence. For instance, in anatomy, typically reproduction is covered last. I personally prefer to cover it last because I like to have the strongest relationships with my students possible before I'm putting, sexual organs on my whiteboard and we're having all these different conversations. I'm trying to not say anything that's going to flag this as an explicit episode, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we're going to be projecting diagrams on the board. I want to have a good relationship with my students. But I also at the same time feel like it's one of the most important body systems. And oftentimes anatomy teachers don't get to it because of time, because they're panicked about pacing, whatever. So maybe the solution looks like, okay, I don't have time for a full reproduction unit, but I can do the pregnancy project. And I can introduce that after I've done like 1 or 2 units in my anatomy class or covered a couple of body systems. Go ahead and introduce the pregnancy project, have them doing it in the background as we go through the year. We can keep bringing it up. We can tie in all these different things without doing a full-fledged unit on it. So those are just some things to consider based on these audits I want you to do of your time and of your resources. Now, if you want help with auditing, I do have a lab audit specifically. It's included in my free virtual professional development course, Labs Unlimited. That is a document that you can take and make a copy of and engage with. And then you could add, I do not believe it has a column for how long things take. I should have checked that before I recorded this, but that's easily a column you can add. And then you could take that and run with it and use it for all instructional resources, or you could just follow what I just told you and kind of jot those things down. But that is my take-home challenge for you is first and foremost, at a bare minimum, calculate your instructional minutes that you should be getting. And then let's just knock that down 10 to 15%, knowing we're going to have 10 to 15% of interruptions. And then use that as realistically how much we're going to lesson plan for. And then if you can, do a time audit of your week this week. And let's look for places where things might be sucking up your time that you're not noticing. And then if you are really an overachiever, you can do your instructional resource audit. Now, the last thing I'll say before I let you go is that some of you use It's Not Rocket Science and you're like, your lesson unit plans are always way too long. There's way more than I could ever get done in a year. And here's what I'll say. that is for several reasons. One is because I've told y'all, this is something I struggle with. Like, I want to do all the things and cover all the things. And I have a lot of ideas and I want to include them for all of y'all and then give you the freedom to choose kind of what you want to pick and choose. Like, I'm thinking about the physical science revamp right now. I've added a lot of engineering type assignments and investigations to the physical science curriculum that I'm obsessed with, but they take a lot of time. But now that gives you the freedom to decide if that is something that's going to matter most to you, is developing those skills. And then if not, then you can cut those out. You can kind of make those decisions. So I like to give you options. If you are thinking about It's Not Rocket Science biology, the 7 core units are what most of you need for your state EOCs. The extension mini units were added on a couple years after I wrote the curriculum for y'all because you had different state standards on different niche topics. So I added some extras and I found that they were great. I could usually get one in after the EOC when I had like a weird 2 to 3 weeks with my students. So yeah, there is more in there than you can actually use. But again, you have the freedom to decide what matters most. And so I hope that you would do that. I have mentioned some resources and a lot of adjacent episodes to this topic. So I'm going to link those in my show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 221. And I would love it if you have not left a rating and a review today on Apple or a rating and a comment on Spotify. I would love it if you would, and especially if you feel less panicked about your pacing or less guilty about being quote unquote behind schedule after listening to this episode. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.